on a simple basis, we're saying, hey, if we can't get $81 per visit, then we're losing money and we're not going to do that. So now we go back to Florida Blue and we say, hey, we would like to talk to you about our contract. We can't get a hold of anybody. And then finally just say, you know what? Forget this. I'm terminating my contract. So I email them. Here's my letter that says I'm terminating contract. They come back and say, oh, before you do that, I would love to talk to you because we think there's something that can be said here. I'm like, wow, I've been trying to email you for 3 months and you haven't responded. One day after I try and terminate my contract, then you come back and say you want to talk. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata, talks with Justin Stiver, the owner of Total Therapy Florida. Justin grew the practice from 1 to now 7 clinics across Florida. Paul and Justin talk through how to renegotiate payer contracts for PT clinics, the best ways to get in contact with insurance companies, and why you must have data in order to renegotiate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
Negotiating a contract is a very difficult thing for a lot of private practice owners to do. And then the biggest barrier to that is getting the person on the phone that's willing to do that. I know we had that last week, we had the office hours chat, and Ben was talking about, they're incentivized to make you happy, have a good score on their customer service and things like that. But I feel like it's so subjective to the, and it just changes depending on which insurance company you're trying to speak to, because I've had different experiences all in all. I mean, like Optum, we dropped Optum a couple of years ago, and after a month of reaching out to everybody I could get my hands on, I just got nothing. And then, Blue Cross Blue Shield, we're currently kind of negotiating them right now, but it's honestly, there's so much involved in just is negotiating a contract the right thing to do? I mean, and by the way, you have to kind of know what's acceptable. It's not just like, hey, please give me $5 more, because you have to understand what number you need in order to make that happen. And there's so much that goes into it. And it was kind of fun for us. I mean, we knew back 2 years ago that the rates that we were getting from Optum and Aetna and Cigna just weren't working for us. The numbers were ridiculous, somewhere, between $38 and $50, depending on the payer. And, that maybe that might work for your model, but for ours, it didn't. We're trying to hang on to that, low, a little bit more of an individualized, one-on-one patient model, which is very, very difficult to do. But obviously with $50 reimbursements one-on-one, you can't make that work. Now, if you're set up to do group therapy in a way, or like, small group based stuff, that might be a great, model. But our practice isn't. We're trying to get the clinicians to come over to us who want that standard, that high standard of care. And so obviously if we're attracting people to our practice, then we're not going to just turn around and say, hey, we're going to double, triple book you, because then we're lying to them, So I would say about 5 years ago, when we started, actually six years ago now, most of the practices around us were single booking patients, and things were great. And, but now I think maybe only one other one that I can think of does that. So they're either shortening their time slots down to take on those flat rate payers that pay $50 per visit. You can see them for 20 minutes and you can build them, and that model works financially, but you can't see them in a 45-minute slot. So we And then also on top of that, you have to look at the burden of taking this many new patients on. So right now, I mean, full disclosure and disclaimer, I'm not telling anyone else what to do. We're not plotting against the insurance companies. We're not colluding. This is just my story, and it may or may not apply to anybody else. And I haven't, I certainly don't want to feel like we're doing something wrong here. But but it's funny. Little backstory on that is I'm kind of joking. I know I'm not colluding, but I'm kind of joking because it seems to be the mindset that like the physical therapy industry has when it comes to talking insurance. It's like, whoa, you're not allowed to do that. And you'd be shocked how many people that have been around for a long time and felt like they needed to step in and tell me, as the newbie, hey, buddy, you're breaking federal law here. You can't talk about insurance rates. I'm like, wait, what? When did that federal law get passed? Because I don't remember that one. And
yeah. Well, there's a lot of people, I think, playing attorney when they shouldn't be.
Right. And that's fine. I mean, and I honestly, it was very frustrating for me to learn the hard way that there's really not a forum for you to talk to other people about this kind of stuff. And but I was on an email board through one of the agencies. I won't mention any names. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but it was a private practice email group of an association that we all pay dues for. And I don't know how many emails are on this list, but probably a couple hundred. And every once in a while, someone will post a great question. Hey, is anyone else having problems with this? Or, hey, I want to clarify this new thing that got passed, rule that got passed. And people will kind of respond and say their two cents. And one person asked the question about insurance rates. And is anyone else feeling like we're kind of struggling here? And quickly, the admin from that group stepped in and said, hey, you guys are going to have to move this discussion to a different forum. It's against our ethics in this group to talk about this. Right?
It's wild. So, absolutely. Yeah.
So I kind of responded something real short, saying like, oh, okay, like agree to disagree, but whatever. It's your rules. And then I wrote the guy an email privately, just laying into him and saying like, how frustrating is this situation that, I went back and reread that lady's email a few times, and she never did anything that was even close to an antitrust, thing there. And he kind of just gave me the expected F off type of response. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but it's just not the rules. And I said, wow. And you guys actually are lobbying for our money to, that's insane. But So then I went to another guy he's a consultant. I won't say his name either, but he's a consultant, and we pay him, $1,500 per year for his all access pass to all the consulting that he does, and including webinars and things like that. Thinking that there's a very good possibility that I'm just missing this or I'm wrong here. Can I reach out to the consultant and ask for advice here? And I didn't ask to weigh in on this or even involve him into what had just happened. I just said, hey, could I get any resources that you have on a little bit more details on the federal antitrust laws and how it pertains to physical therapy or the healthcare space, and how can I better educate myself on these things? That's it. His response was, sorry, Justin, I don't consult on these topics. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like no one will even talk about this. This is crazy. And so from there, now here we are today. And that's one of the reasons I'm kind of, I'm not very optimistic that as a professional, we're going to come together and figure this out, because we can't even talk about it.
Okay. I'm an optimist. You could punch me in the face and I'd be like, oh, he just tripped or whatever. So the optimistic view of this is that we have a bunch of armchair quarterbacks playing lawyer that, are throwing around scary words without knowing what that means. Like generally speaking, collusion and antitrust and all that has a pretty clear legal definition. Like, again, just to make the point here, like, it's not collusion if we're talking about it. It gets into collusion if I say, Justin, don't accept any deal less than X, and I'll also do the same. And then we build a whole, and historically, by the way, customers have never been accused of, I don't think there's any case law that I'm aware of where customers or clients have ever been accused of like collusion. In fact, if you look at historical case law on this, that stuff is really reserved for the seller. So, it's like on the investing side, if it, yeah. So anyway, so the optimistic view of this is you got a lot of armchair quarterbacks that are like super scared. That consultant you're talking about, that trade group you're talking about. The optimistic view is that they're just not sure, and so they just decide to stay out of it. The pessimistic view of this is that that there may be like a concerted PR and lobbying effort behind the scenes with dollars exchanging hand to influence those club rules. That being said, though, I think transparency's. Oh yeah, and I think like this is where transparency comes in, and it's kind of the reason why like our I started publishing our benchmark data and our public data, and it's interesting to see how people use it. I mean, I wish I could like probably push it a little bit more often, but anyway, I could ramble about this forever, but
great idea. And I it's funny because what I was going to do is kind of just walk you through what I did and have learned after wondering if we should try and renegotiate a contract. So the unique situation our company is in is that Florida Blue, and in this area in Florida at least, I don't know if it's statewide, is not an open network. And it hasn't been that way since I was even first a tech in the PT world 15 years ago. It was always been a closed network to where, that's why if you buy somebody that's got a Florida Blue contract, then you can be grandfathered into their contract and et cetera, et cetera. And as far as I know, Florida Blue in Florida is the only one that is like that. We were able to get under Optum, and we were able to get under Aetna and Cigna and all those pretty easily. But Florida Blue will not let you in. So when we purchased our business in 2018, we purchased a Florida Blue contract, and it was just one location in Osprey, and we inherited that contract. We were able to have it there, and we were told falsely, that it's okay. You're allowed to just have one place, and you can open up other locations, just do all the billing through this other place. And I talked to other people that had, multiple locations. They were doing all the same thing. Well, when I came on board with Strata, you guys were kind of like, hey, that I don't know that that's the above board way to do it. So we of course got on the phone, and it's very hard to get on the phone with somebody at Florida Blue that'll give you the right answer. So, weeks and weeks to get on the phone, we said, yeah, you're absolutely right. We're not supposed to be doing this. So we stopped billing, those other clinics, and we just kept the one clinic in. And we struggled because it's a confusing message to our patients saying like, okay, we're in network in Florida Blue, but only in our one office. And also the patients, but also the physicians are the ones that really struggle with it. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not doing all that work to ask them if they can go to your Osprey office. And that was a big problem. And that was one of the issues that I had. And I said, look, it's just too much administrative work. We have to verify their insurance and say, okay, if you go to our Osprey office, here's your patient responsibility. If you do this, and we have to try and explain that to the patient on the phone. That's insane. Like they don't get it. So they just think that you're an idiot or that you're lying to them. And that's not a good look for us either way. Basically, now I start looking at our reimbursements. Luckily, in Strata, I can find easily by payer, by clinic, by date. I can figure out what our reimbursement rates are for each payer. And then I can look at the numbers. I can create my own spreadsheets. I can figure out that we're getting $65 to round up. $65 an in-network Florida Blue visit, and we're getting $95 as an out-of-network at our other locations. So, okay, that's a little strange. We're getting $30 more per visit. Now, in the meantime, I've gone back and I've I know exactly what our cost per visit is. Right now, it's $81 to company wide. We have startup clinics that are in the hundreds, and then we have other ones that are in like low 70s that are so. But our average is $81 per visit. We'd like to get that number down some as we, but really, that's our line in the sand kind of drawn there. Now, that's so we have to, if we're not accepting $81 per visit, then we're not making money there. And now you have to ask yourself, is it a startup clinic that I have 30% of my schedule is blank because I'm getting zero in those spots. So yes, I would take 65 instead of zero, right? But then as you continue to get busier, now you're on a 2-3 week wait, and you have those patients waiting that are maybe $110 payers, $130 payers. Now they're going to go somewhere else because they're calling around. When you tell them you're on a 3 to 4 week wait, they're calling around and making sure that there's nowhere else that can get them in sooner. And when they find someone that'll take them next week, they might jump ship. Meanwhile, on your schedule, you're full of these payers that are paying you $65 per visit. And then that's a very tricky thing to calculate on, is how much money did I just lose, potential revenue did I just lose from a $130 payer because I'm taking a $65 payer? So that's also has to be calculated. So we go and we have we've done a great job knowing our numbers, and on a simple basis, we're saying, hey, if we can't get $81 per visit, then we're losing money and we're not going to do that. So now we go back to Florida Blue and we say, hey, we would like to talk to you about our contract. We can't get a hold of anybody. No one's, and then finally just say, you know what, forget this. I'm terminating my contract. So I email them. Here's my letter that says I'm terminating contract. They come back and say, oh, before you do that, I would love to talk to you because we think there's something that can be said here. I'm like, wow, I've been literally trying to email you for 3 months and you haven't responded. One day after I try and terminate my contract, then you come back and talk.
Funny, right? How that works, right?
So I'm wondering if there's some kind of metric there, like that they're being tracked on, is how many people terminated their contract. But I'm not sure there. So it took about a 15-minute phone call, and then she said, I will make the exception for you to get all of your other 7 clinics into our network, and so that you're all in, and that confusing message that you're talking about is not there anymore. I said, wow, that was really easy. And then she said, well, but you got to accept this contract. In all 7 clinics, you got to accept this contract, this percentage of our fee schedule, which is exactly the same as what we currently have. And she said, there's no that you can't, you have to accept that for a period of 12 months. At that point, after 12 months, you can renegotiate our contract after that. So I said, okay. So our Osprey clinic, which we've had for 6 years, that one's eligible to be renegotiated. And she said, yes. So, okay, well, before I sign the contract for my other 7 clinics, I would like to try and renegotiate my Osprey contract, because I feel like at least if I can negotiate a fair rate with that, then I would feel better going into the 1 year where we're going to lose our butts on this, thinking that I'm confident that I could probably renegotiate those contracts to that level later. That was a couple weeks ago. That conversation is ongoing. So, but then last week, Tuesday, we have our offsite meeting with all the directors of our offices. We take the whole day and we shut down their schedules. We're still open, but each director from every clinic comes off site and we meet for the whole day and we go over all the quarterly planning stuff. Look back at last time, all the numbers, all the metrics. We solve a whole bunch of problems. It's a great meeting. And I brought up this conversation with Florida Blue and I said, what do you guys think? And they said, well, we don't, like, how many patients does the Osprey Clinic see every year in network? I say they see about 3,000 patient visits, about 30% of their schedule. And I said, okay. So if we bring on a Florida Blue in these clinics, we are going to have to add another 1.2 full-time employees to see those people. Okay. And then what are we going to do with our admin side? Because our admin team is so tapped out right now. How are we going to onboard? So we have to think about that. So if there's 3,000 visits, that means that there's about 300 new patients at each clinic. That's 2,000 new patients. If I went and took a list of 2,000 patients and I dropped them on my admin team's desk, and I said, hey, let me know when you're done onboarding and scheduling these 2,000 patients, they are going to come to me. And how long would that take? Would that take 2 months? I don't know. It would take a long time.
Right. Right.
So then in order to take this on, we're going to have to add 3 people to our admin team. Okay. We're going to have to add 3 full-time employees to our admin team, coupled with the 1 full-time employee to each location. So now we're up to 10 full-time employees now, just to bring on in-network Blue Cross Blue Shield. How much is that going to cost us? So now you have to look at that, and then you have to really reverse engineer that number and say, is it going to work for us? And not only that, but is it worth all that work to do? Because our time that we're going to spend hiring, training 10 full-time employees and seeing an additional 3,000 patients per year, that time could be spent on something else if it's not going to be financially worth it.
Right.
So as it stands right now, today, we haven't made a final decision on this, but I'm really thinking of, regardless of them offering us those contracts, I'm thinking that it's not a great idea for us to move forward in network with Blue Cross Blue Shield,
because it's simple math. Yeah. I mean, it's just
simple math. Yeah.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you while you were kind of going through your thought process there. But when you at the beginning of that, you started talking about your cost per, I think you said it was your cost per visit. I think that was $81. And I know you had some disclaimers there, difference between startup and not, but just napkin math. How do you calculate that? You're just looking at whatever your salary is for that provider. Like what's the napkin math version of how you're coming up with that?
That's actually, that number is expense, our total expense divided by how many visits we do every year. That's a way zoomed out number of everything, every expense that we have. That's the easiest number to calculate at the end of the year, is divide total number of visits into that, the total expense number. From there, I know so from there, you can either try and get your reimbursement, or those 2 things that can be changed there is your number of visits. So I can see more visits with the same expense that I have. So staffing expense is our biggest expense. So I can either change a schedule. I can double book. I can help with our no-show cancellation policy, rates. There's a lot of things, adherence to plan of cares. There's a lot of things you can do. So you have to figure out, where am I missing? What's my total rate of patients versus scheduling opportunities? And you can call that whatever you want, schedule efficiency, and then if there's ways to improve that, great, do it. You should. Other than that, getting your expenses down. So, on our expense side, we also calculate the key things that I like to look at are the payroll percentage of revenue, occupancy expense percentage of revenue, and the supplies expense percentage of revenue, and the business development marketing expense percentage of revenue. And I can know that, any of those can be changed by making a decision. Once you're in the right spot there, then you have to figure out, what can I control? What can I move? And then after that is, you have to compare that expense per visit cost to revenue per visit cost. And the same story goes for revenue per visit, because then you're looking at, what am I getting paid per visit and everything else. Those 2 things, expense per visit and revenue per visit, Those are, in a nutshell, the most two important things that we look at compared to each other.
Right. Yeah. And I remember you mentioned this to me before, how you think about that. And the reason I asked was because I think for anybody listening to this, back to your like sort of broader point, a lot of this information is not transparent, and all that. And I think if you kind of start to go down this path, it can be confusing to figure out. And tell me if I'm misspeaking here. The simple version of should you be thinking about renegotiating your contracts comes down to what is your cost per visit? And in your case, that formula you just outlined, where it's total expense divided by total number of visits during that same time period, gives you a number. And then when you look at that number, in your case, I think you said it was $81. Once you have that number, any of your existing contracts that pays below that number is a target. and that's sort of the rudimentary summary of this whole thing, I think, right?
Super simple, easy. And it's honestly, if someone takes the time to figure out those numbers and the factors that play into those numbers, because you have to understand every factor that goes into those numbers too. When you see it all on paper, it makes the decision so easy for you that you're like almost shocked. Like I've checked my numbers 30 times. Like I must be missing something, but it's right there. And the other really cool thing is if you have multiple clinics like ours, is you can actually see a payer mix breakdown, because our clinics are all different. Some of them have a higher Medicare percentage, higher Blue Cross Blue Shield, higher self-pay, auto, and you can really look at the payer breakdowns and that stuff per each clinic and compare side by side to the clinic too. And you can get some good insight out of that. And, just seeing kind of a clinic go from startup to year 1, year 2, year 3, maturity for us is somewhere around year 3, depending on other things. But other markets are tougher. Other markets are easier. But after 3 full years of open, we're usually close to capacity, and I can look at that clinic and say, okay, this is a realistic number that I can look at now. Whereas if I just started one up last year or two, your numbers are going to look bad because you're just not fully built out yet. But it's always nice to be able to compare those startups to the ones that are 1 year ahead of them and 1 year ahead of those. So, it's always easier. I think that just goes down to having more data. The more data you have, everything's easier. So it is. During the office hours chat last week, we did have one guy question, and I didn't really know how to answer him because it's hard. I have one clinic that I just opened. How do I go about knowing my cost per visit? And that's a whole nother ballgame, because now you have those openings. So, in a perfect world, accept every pair you can get in the beginning, take what you can get, fill, and then when you start to get full, then you look back and have this data, and then you can make informed decisions. And because there's nothing worse than having a spot on your schedule where you're paying a therapist to be there and you made $0. So it's being in our situation, this many clinics, this many patients, it's oversimplified versus starting up too. So you have to always think about that.
You can pass on this question if you want. But again, in the context of like giving people more transparency here, obviously when we think about that number, right, that, that $81 that you talked about, how you handle that can be very binary. You could just say, I'm no longer accepting that insurance. That's just not going to happen. Or that could be one of the outcomes. But can you talk a little bit about what the process looks like once you've identified, so there you are, you're a practice owner, you've discovered your cost per visit. You've maybe identified one of your payers or one of your contracts that's paying at or below that cost. Just at a high level, what does that look like for you? Are you picking up the phone? Are you going to a consultant? What does it look like to actually renegotiate with the, with the payer? And again, I'm asking in the context of like somebody listening to this now is like, all right, I'm doing the math. Okay, Justin, now what do I do? Do I like just call the payer direct? What do I do?
I would try. I would email them. I would call them. I would copy any. I would start off by saving any contacts you ever have with any of these payers, whether it's a claim follow up, and also train your team into asking for people to speak to. Like if it's an issue where you feel like you have to escalate it to somebody, ask them to escalate it for you and take down the contact info of the person that you finally, maybe, hopefully get escalated to. And then, be very, it's not much different than going out there to the physician's offices and doing business development sales calls. In a way, you're using the front desk, the medical assistants and things like that in these physician's office. You're using them for information in exchange for you, being very nice to them and also doing a good job and making their patients happy. So in a way, you're looking at it the same way with an insurance company, is you're doing a great job with their beneficiaries. You're providing them great physical therapy care. Your billing team is doing the right thing. You're very professional and you're a pleasure to work with. So out of it's okay to ask favors every once in a while. And then we create a document in the insurance drive that we have where we just throw any information that we can find into that document, whether it's emails or contact information or all these little things that we learn by just operating daily. And then you just kind of work that list and figure out. And it's there's no simple way. It's just like doing lunches with physicians. It's like there's no simple way. There's no SOP on it. You just have to you have to always trying to get to the next step. And finally, you'll get a hold of somebody, and your year's worth of picking and prodding and scheming and planning are going to be overly. It's gonna be like taking care of, like, oh yeah, why didn't you just tell me? I would have talked to you about this last year. And you're like, if you knew how frustrated I was right now behind this freaking phone, I would come through it and ring it back. But thank you so much. So it's all being resourceful. Honestly, is you got to. Years can go by of you just taking yes or no for an answer, and then you got nowhere. There's and what I've learned is there's no system built in place for these insurance companies for you to list for. No one cares about you. I mean, they don't care about you as a provider. They care about their actual customers. They you want to make sure they're paying you properly, and they want to make sure they're doing that. But they really don't have any vested interest in you and your reimbursement rates and the health of your business. So you can't expect that to just happen.
Again, I'm going to ask the question. You can always pass on it if you want. Just out of curiosity, like, and you don't have to give me specifics or anything like that, but what does success look like? In your own history, like, have there been, without naming specific payers or anything like that, this exercise probably seems like a lot of work to somebody, but can you just at a high level talk about like some of the wins you've experienced, where it's like, hey, I had this payer that was paying me X, which was below the 81, and I chased him down and did all this, and it, maybe now it's 90 or something. What does it actually look like just at a high level?
Yeah, we've had success. We've had success with workers' comp payers paying us a little bit more. I feel like we have success with Blue Cross Blue Shield right now, even though I can't say for sure because it hasn't happened yet. But we have options right now. But to be honest with you, I haven't had any success. I think we've successfully increased our rates with like 3 payers that I can think of. And it wasn't a huge number, but I mean, $5 a visit can make a big difference when you're seeing 50,000 visits per year, because that, so anything is good because you're not having to do anything else, adding anything else to your payroll and nothing else other than just do business as usual. And you get paid $250,000 per year more if you have a $5 reimbursement rate increase. With that being said, I will admit that this is not something that we've dedicated a ton of time to either. if you compare it to things that we do for like business development. But I would certainly say that it's money well spent. If you're an insurance based practice, now for us, we're not terribly exposed to all these commercial payers because we take Medicare as our primary payer, and Medicare in Florida. Now it's crazy because other states they hate Medicare, but in Florida, Medicare pays us what we think is with Medicare's rates of $107 per visit, we can make a 25% profit margin off of that. But we can't do it at the $65 per rate with Blue Cross Blue Shield. So, but I would certainly say that at the same time, you need to be spending time just chipping away at these insurance companies, whether it's every week you send an email, every month you make a phone call. And then when you get someone up on the phone, you're asking them these questions. And by the way, you have to have stuff to back it up because like I said earlier, by saying, hey, my business is struggling, I'm about to have to close my business because you're not paying me enough. They don't care about that. What they care about is how many visits per plan of care that you see the patient, what value you're adding, what your physician's relationship strength is. So with us, they turn their ear when you say, hey, we have the best reputation in our area with physicians. Physicians send us their patients after surgery. And here are, I think we had over 70 signed letters from orthopedic physicians that said Total Therapy Florida is our preferred choice. Unfortunately, our patients are not able to go to Total Therapy Florida if they have Blue Cross Blue Shield because you will not allow them to be in network with your insurance company. And it's a really big in our butts, basically, is what they said. And that changed everything when we sent them that. So there's ways that you can leverage what you're doing for them, and having outcomes data is important. But really, I mean, ultimately, when it comes down to it, they care more about how much money you're spending. So if you can tell them that we're getting our patients better in 9.6 visits, and they're actually 26% improved on their outcome measures versus the industry average of 12.6 visits. What is that equating to over the course of 5,000 patients? That's equating to 15,000 visits at $65 a piece. So that's big number. So they care about that kind of thing. But then also on the flip side, there are other things that we can control ourselves, like schedule efficiencies and just how you have your schedule laid out. There's a lot of creative things we can do to accommodate the specific payers and their specific rules. Because, for example, Blue Cross Blue Shield, if we wanted to, we could double book a Blue Cross Blue Shield patient, and all of a sudden $65 isn't terrible when you have two of them at the same time. But yeah, then again, you have to look at it and see, does my model work for that too? But on top of that, it's also getting that expense number down, and one good way to get your expense number down is getting more visits in the door, because our Inglewood clinic, and what's really interesting, if I didn't have all of our financial data on here, I would share my screen. But when I look at our Osprey office, I'm pulling this directly from the spreadsheet looking at it now. Our total expense per visit is only $66.66. Okay. But our average reimbursement per visit, revenue per visit, it's like $79 per visit. So yes, there's profit there. It's a profitable clinic. But when you look at that, this Osprey office is our busiest office in our whole company. We see 12,000 visits per year out of this office. Now I go down to our Inglewood office. Our Inglewood office has a $62.81 revenue that's expense per visit. So it's very similar to Osprey, actually a little bit lower. And the reason why that's a little bit lower is because we have a different payer mix. I'm sorry, we have different expenses. So we have a lower occupancy expense there. We were paying $9,000 per month rent in Osprey. And, we pay about $2,400 a month to own the space in Inglewood. So now when you go to Inglewood's revenue per visit, we're at $96.36, right? That right there. And we only did, we did 10,000 visits there last year. So we did 2,000 visits less. We made $96 per visit instead of $79 per visit. And our expenses were pretty much the same, a little bit lower. So all of a sudden now you're looking at like a 35% profit margin in that clinic. I mean, that is insane. And by the way, for perspective on what we've been talking about, Osprey is the clinic where we accept Blue Cross Blue Shield. When we did the math, if we just cut out the 3,000 Blue Cross Blue Shield visits that we had, we would drop 1.2 full-time employees, and we would be able to occupy a smaller space and pay less per month. And now we're all of a sudden probably taking our profit margin from probably 9 to 12% up to, the 20-25% just by dropping one payer. When you go there, then you're making yourself a little bit more at risk, right? Because now you're relying on less payers, potentially less referral sources, and everything else. So you have to bring the business development team into this conversation also.
Yeah.
Which we did. And I went to my business. Yeah.
One of the things I love about you, Justin, is that, and I say this with all the respect in the world to everybody else, obviously a lot of people get into medicine and PT because they want to help people, and I get that. But you're one of the few that has found a way to sort of balance, I suppose, the noble nature of PT with the practical reality of spreadsheets,
Right.
without compromising on either side of it. I think just the fact that you talked about that example of, better outcomes. Everybody talks about better outcomes, but even in your example just now, you quantified it. Well, if it's 12.6 on average for a particular payer, but you can show that you did it or you improved that patient in 10 visits. That's a practical improvement where the payer, it's a lot easier for the payer to justify paying you more if it results in 2 less visits for the patient. And I think that's the subtle but really important thing that I think people, I hope, kind of gravitate towards here is that, I know you're putting a bunch of disclaimers on stuff because you have to. Every practice isn't the same, if they're in Colorado versus Florida or whatever. But the ideas here are very similar.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's Medicare, Blue Cross, private. I mean, it also applies to when you're setting your self-pay rates too. So, and the important thing is that you have to understand where your patients are coming from. You have to be able to project what the fallout is going to be from dropping some payers too, because that's real. I think in general, private practice owners that I talk to are so scared of dropping payers because they think the fallout's going to be like nuclear war. The doctor is going to take it personal and stop sending patients to you. My business development team, by the way, I hope they're listening because I love to just bust their chops about this stuff, is a sales business development person will always want to make the decisions on what makes their job easier. So cutting payers does not make a salesperson's job easier. It makes it much harder. They have to go there now and actually sell other things and say, hey, we are inconveniencing you by doing this, but it's still worth sending your business to us. So that's a very harsh reality. So honestly, I know we've talked about this in the past, but bringing, we comp our guy off of profits with the business development side. So it comes very naturally for us to have this conversation with him because he wants to know how we're doing. And ultimately, you have to say, hey, it's not just about the number of referrals that comes through our doors. It's about the quality of the referrals too. So when you're looking at the referring physician reports in Strata, don't just go by total numbers, go by converted. Okay. Because one, that tells you that they're sending us people who we are in network with, which saves us a lot of time of onboarding the patient, calling them just to have them tell us, no, thank you, we're going to go somewhere else because they're in network. But also look at, based on their insurance splits on that doctor, look at how much revenue per visit we're getting from each one of their referrals, because that's ultimately what I really care about. Like, you might have increased our total number of referrals by 30%, but you did it because you went to all the lowest hanging fruit and you told them that we'll take all their patients, when that's not true, So it's, I think what we talked about today is probably going to be used to get these listeners and the practice owners of this podcast to say, should I do this? Or, do you think I should look at my payer mix, and is there anybody on the chopping block? And ultimately I would say that, it's very complex, but it all starts with knowing your numbers. If not, you're just flying blind.
Yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time. One other question on this, by the way. In your history, and again, I know this, you can pass on this if it's too specific to your practice. What would have to be true for you to eventually decide, I'm not accepting this payer anymore? Is it as simple as like, hey, the math is way off? Or is it like, hey, I tried to reach out to them, they're not playing ball, and I can't keep bleeding this money? Like, how do you think about that? Because you've sort of alluded to the fact that, dropping a payer can cause other problems. It could be a revolt with the patients. It could be a problem with an existing relationship you have. So what does that look like? Just high level, if you can speak to that.
I think you have to ask yourself what the risks are, because of, if you do drop somebody, do you have no relationships with the physicians around? Because then that might be a bigger problem. We have a business development team that knows these offices like they're BFF with everybody in the office. I mean, they love our team, so that they can have a conversation and probably limit how much damage there is to your referrals based on that conversation. But if they didn't have a good office rapport, that they would be, I wouldn't blame the doc. Like, no, come on, you only accept Medicare? Like, forget it. There's other people who want our business. But so first of all, you have to have a strong brand, strong reputation, and you have to do other things to make that happen. Once you can say you do have a strong brand, then you have more flexibility. So if you're out there listening and you're saying, should I get a business development person? This is one very good reason why you should. Then from there, it's you actually have to see how much revenue you're losing right now. And with Blue Cross Blue Shield, I did a 2024 projection. If we went in network with Blue Cross Blue Shield, what would we do based on all the data that I have at my fingertips, and my best guess on how I could staff? Because there's clinics of ours that don't have the capacity to bring on 1.2 full-time employees. Like, we have clinics that have 1,800 square feet, and we're already full to the max with 5 therapists in there. Like, there's no way we can add 1.2 more. If we did add Blue Cross Blue Shield, we would now lose money because our wait list would go through the roof, and we wouldn't be able to get these Medicare payers or the auto payers or those that pay better. So I projected our numbers, and I figured that if we accepted Blue Cross Blue Shield this year in 2024, we would lose $300,000 in profits over if we didn't accept Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I would have to be a reckless person in order to accept Blue Cross Blue Shields based on my calculations. Now, if you can negotiate that contract up $10, then that totally changes things. So
that's right.
So I would say, don't just say, oh, forget it. Try your best. The thing is, in our situation, we're a little bit easier because we're not in network with Blue Cross Blue Shield and these other places. So we're not having to see their patients right now, and that's fine. It's a little harder when you're already seeing their patients and you are unhappy with what you're getting paid. But I would say if the numbers tell you that you should drop them, don't be afraid to actually, Now you have to be ready to drop them, but you can kind of threaten them with termination and probably get someone's ear. But if your data tells you that if you don't increase your by $10 per visit that you can't keep them, then what do you have to lose anyway? Because you can't keep them anyway.
I love the practicality of this too. And I think, well, I want to be respectful of your time, but I think my hope is that by having more and more of these conversations, I think maybe it'll draw more listeners to come out and talk about this stuff too, even if we need to talk about it off the record or whatever, because they're still worried about the legality of it. The fact is, these conversations that we're having are already happening. Like, just because they can't happen on a certain trade group's email list doesn't mean the conversation doesn't happen. I know at least a couple of our own clients that actually have a monthly dinner set up with other practice owners within a 50-mile radius of their home base, where they're actually just sitting there with a notepad talking about like what they're getting paid and all that, and then comparing notes. So these conversations are already happening.
Yeah, 100%. And it's something that you should just speaking out loud. If I get a contact at an insurance company, I mean, yeah, I don't see any problem with me sharing it with other people. Hey, here's the email that I was able to make happen with me. And by the way, now, like, a new study, the economic value of physical therapy was a big hit, and we showed them that if they do PT, they're actually going to spend less money in the long run, versus surgery, injections, other things. So talk about the value that you can save. And I think, the last thing I'll say is we're so used to what matters to us, and a lot of times what helps us can also help somebody else. And you have to find that common ground. Help us, because I don't care about getting 3,000 patients per year per clinic. I care about getting $5 more per visit. And I don't care if that number is only 1,000, so be more selective of your patients and then pay us more. Like, I would be open to having conversations with them saying, like, just send me your knee replacements, because with our technology, we can do better and less visits with your knee replacements, but give us an extra $15 per visit. Send the rest of them to some other clinic that accepts $65. That's fine with me. We care to make money. You care about revenue per visit, not about total revenue, because that's not scalable.
Right.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.